And now we're back on promise of priorities, so priorities in life. So let me ask you a question. How many of you would love to have a 30-hour day? I don't know, maybe some of you wouldn't, but I would. I've been running crazy lately, and it's just like, man, if I just had a 30-hour day. This whole week was just nuts for me. I was out of town and catching planes and sitting in airports and not getting anything done. I thought, man, if I could just have an extra, 5 or 6 hours a day, think of all I could do. And then I was kind of thinking about that. I thought, what I would get done if I had a 30-hour day instead of a 24-hour day? Probably nothing more than I'm getting done in my 24-hour day. Because usually at night, I've been busy all day, but I go to bed, it's like, man, I got nothing done. It's just an incredible feeling that I have this 30-hour day, and I have these lists kind of in my head. I don't do actual physical lists. My wife does. She crosses them off, and I used to, but now I have this list in my head, and man, I got none of that done. It just seems like nothing got finished. And so I kind of lay there a little depressed at night. I was like, man, I'm just like frustrated. My life's not going where it should be, and it's all my fault, must be, because I'm not managing my time well or something. And I'm thinking, this is awful. But the reality is, I go to bed exhausted, feel like I got nothing done, but no one's ever died because of it. Now, maybe you're in a different world. Maybe you're in a medical world where you don't get something done. Maybe someone will die. But no one's ever died because of my list not getting finished. And let me get kind of morbid for a minute. No one's ever said, well, if you don't get this list done, I'm going to take out somebody you love, and I'm going to put out both of their eyes and make them blind. I've never had to live through something like that. I know that's morbid. Or I'm going to break their legs, some kind of a loan shark or something. You don't do this. Unless you're Liam Neeson, probably, because he seems to be in those situations in all of his movies. But unless you're something like that, you probably have to live with that. But the reason I bring up that kind of morbid thought is that Jesus did. Think about that. Jesus had the same 24-hour day that we have. And the difference is that there are people that their entire life was dependent upon getting a chance to see Jesus. People who are blind, people who are lame, people who had leprosy, which is a death sentence. Right? So if Jesus doesn't get to see these people, if they can't somehow get face-to-face with him, they're never going to get healed. So somebody he loves, because he loved all of them, somebody he loved very much as you love anybody, wasn't going to have their sight. So they're going to be blind because he couldn't get to them that day. So, we see this all out throughout the scriptures. This passage in Mark actually comes after another passage where a multitude comes to him and he spends all day with them, feeds them, but then they're still there and he simply has to leave. Sometimes his disciples are literally like pulling him away from the crowds. You need time off. And he'd go off, and so they get in a boat, they go across the lake, and when they get there and they get out, people hear and they come running again. So he can't help but get the multitudes. But look at this. They began carrying on beds those who were too sick whenever they heard where he was. And wherever he entered into villages, cities, or the country, they laid the sick in the marketplace and begged him that they might just touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched him were made well. That's great. That is maximizing your potential. He doesn't even have to pray over them. He just walks by. If they can touch his garment, as many people as could touch his garment were healed. But here's the thing, many, but not all. There were some people who didn't get there. There's some people in the back who didn't get up to Jesus. They couldn't touch his garment. Jesus would end up leaving their city, and he would never have a chance to give them the healing that they craved. He had a couple scenes where he met like the woman who anoints his feet with oil. She's a prostitute, and he forgives her sins and gives and makes her free of her life. But how many prostitutes never got that? How many blind people were never not healed? Lepers, never made clean. Prostitutes, never forgiven. How many of those must have been throughout the day? And Jesus knew of them. He could see them in the crowd. And he knew he wouldn't get there. Can you imagine what his day must have been like at the end of it? When he put his head down, not on a pillow, probably a rock or something, because he didn't even have a bed. How did Jesus feel when his day ended? See, when he stepped into our world and he was no longer God, he stepped into limitations, and one of the limitations is he was stuck with 24 hours, just like us. And yet, as much as you would think, boy, Jesus must have been really depressed when he went, all the people he couldn't reach. He must have been exhausted like we are every day from all this. And then we see this prayer he gives in the Gospel of John. Jesus spoke these words, lifted up his eyes to heaven, and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may also glorify you. I have glorified you on earth, and here it comes, I have finished the work which you have given me to do. I finished it. That's incredible. He was only here for, his ministry only lasted 3 years. In 3 years' time, this is towards the end. This is before, he goes before Pilate and he's going to be crucified. He says, I finished. I did everything you sent me here to do, Lord. That's incredible. And in fact, his last words before he dies and is risen again, when Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, it is finished. And bowing his head, he gave up his spirit. The last words he spoke before he dies on the cross, it's finished. I finished it. I did it all. Everything I came here to do, I did. I'm thinking, wow, that's amazing to me. He's got a much harder task load than I have, and yet he says at the end of it, I finished it. I'm done. Finished. How is that even possible? If you look at it, how is Jesus able to do that with everything he had to get done? In my day, it's nothing like what his is, and I go to bed every night feeling I got nothing done. What's the difference? Well, our busiest days we get nothing done because we spend our time doing what is urgent and we neglect doing what is important. And this is the single most important thing that you can take away from this sermon. Because we will spend our time doing what is urgent and we neglect what is important. And what we're feeling at the night when we're laying down and we feel like things didn't get done, it's not a commentary on how much work we did. It's a commentary on our spirit telling us that what we did wasn't important. And when I say not important, I don't mean important in the world, important to the United States of America. Some of you may have those kind of lives. I don't. But it's important to me. And what I mean by that is God has put things in me that I feel are important, and he gave them to me for a reason. And if I'm not getting those things done, I will go to bed thinking I got nothing done. And that's the difference. My day is robbed by what is urgent, and what is important is not getting done. So I'm going to talk about the secret of finishing and how we can get there. And I'm going to start with kind of a 3-step process. It's a little bit facetious, so bear with me here a little bit. First of all, we need to focus on what's important. That's step 1. Step 2 is we need to blame God. I'm going to come back to that one, okay? And step 3, we're going to sleep like a baby. You don't have to write this down because I'm going to change this a little bit. I don't want to write this down. This because you don't believe what the pastor said. So anyway, but this is kind of the 3-step process that we see in Jesus' life a little bit. Again, I'm being a little facetious, but the best illustration I can have is several years ago, back when I was in technical sales, which means I wasn't a sales guy, but I worked with sales guys. They sent us to this time management course, because if we could manage our time better, we could make more money for the company. So that was the thinking. And we're sitting in a group of, probably about 50 or 60 type A personality sales guys. And the guy asks a question. He says, how many of you have a book at home right now that you think would be good for you to read? I'm like, oh, yeah, everybody's hand went up. Says, how many of you actually believe that reading is important? And everybody's like, oh, yeah, reading is important. And then he said, keep your hands up now. How many of you have read a book this week? About half the hands went down. He said, no, I'm not counting the books you had to read for work. And then everybody else's hand went down. It was like 2 hands up. And he says, okay, so let me ask you a question. If we all agree as a group that reading's important, why in the whole week that you had did no one read? And somebody from the back, I don't even know who it was, one of those wise guys always calls things out, but he said something that was the most profound things I've ever heard. He says, because a book doesn't ring. And I thought that was so great. It's just a nice little picture. I love pictures about the difference between what's urgent and what's important. Because we were all in sales, we all answer the phone. You always answer the phone, no matter what. If someone's calling you, there's a reason. You need to answer that phone. We're taught to do that in sales. And we're kind of taught to do that in our lives, right? And so the phones ring. Only now, phones don't just ring, do they? They beep, they buzz, they vibrate. They do all kinds of things. I not only have phone calls coming through here, I've got tweets and Facebook messages, Snapchats, and all kinds of things. All these things are urgent. What happens when your phone beeps, buzzes, and vibrates? You have to look at it, right? It doesn't matter what else is going on. You could be driving. It doesn't matter. I got to see what that was. Is it important? Oh, come on. Usually not. I mean, how many of us have really gotten a tweet that was important in our lives? Really, honestly. How many Facebook status updates were really important in our lives? But they're urgent. Listen, what is urgent in our lives is strangling what's important in our lives. And it happens to all of us. Last week, Victoria and I've been traveling, and so we're out, doing our shopping, which is always my joy when I come home. That's always what's waiting for me, this big shopping thing we always have to do together because they're out, So anyway, we're driving to do some shopping, and she makes a comment on what she's going to buy, and she says, you know what I'm really in the mood for? buffalo wings. So I'm going to make some buffalo wings. And I just want to point out, she may have come to me Ukrainian, but she's Pittsburgh now. When she's telling me she's craving buffalo wings, So I said, okay, that sounds good. And she has this recipe she wanted to try, and she made a list of the ingredients, and I'm going to make some buffalo wings. This will be great. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to surprise her a little bit. I'm going to pretend to make a wrong turn, and I'm going to end up at Quaker Steak and Lube. And we're going to just, because we haven't seen each other for a while. So this is going to be my little thing. Right? I'm going to go ahead and take her to get some buffalo wings. And we can still make them later, but she wants buffalo wings. I'm going to take her to buffalo wings. So I do this. This is all planned out. I make the wrong turn. Oh, well, I might as well head over to Century 3 now. And so I go, and we pull up in front of Quaker Steak and Lube, and she's like, well, what are you doing here? Oh, I'm hungry, so let's go eat something. What else to get at Steak and Lube, right? So we go in there, and I'm pretty proud of myself, but here's the amazing thing. So we sit down, we're sitting across from each other. We haven't seen each other all week. I'm taking her here because, I'm trying to do something nice. And we order, the stuff. The waitress goes away, and I got my phone out. And I'm reading through this thing that I was trying for work, and Victoria gets to see this, for the whole lunch. Now, if you were to ask me, which is more important to you, your phone or your wife, I would definitely say my wife. And not just because she's within striking distance. Obviously, I did this whole thing because my wife is important to me, but you know how important she felt to me about that time? In fact, she called me on it. So, I come here and this is what we do. I watch you on your phone. See, what's urgent easily steals from us what's important. Instead of having this great time that my wife would go away saying, "My, he really values me and loves me," she walks away thinking, "You idiot." I could have gone anywhere and gotten somebody to sit there on a phone. I didn't need to come here with you. So what is urgent to us always steals what is important from us. And so we have to look at this. Now, the problem with this time management course, which is really great in a lot of ways, is that it didn't have any godly perspective on it. And that's where it kind of started lacking. And what he does next was really cool. He asks us, what is the most important thing to you? And of course, we're a bunch of sales guys, so what would you expect us to say?
Everybody needs money. That's why they call it money.
So that's what we said, right? Everybody needs money. So yeah, what's the most important thing to you? Everybody said money. Money. Oh yeah, everybody laughed, everybody agreed, yeah. Different amounts of money, but everybody, money. He said, okay, that's interesting. Like he had never heard it before. This guy was a pro. He said, okay, let me ask you a question. He said, you guys know what steel girder is, right? And we were downtown at the Lawrence Convention, David Lawrence Convention Center is where this was being held. And so he says, you know what steel girder is, right? It's 28 inches deep and it's 14 inches wide. He says, suppose I had one of those and I had it up in this room, and that room is a little bit longer than this one. This is about 30 feet long, but just picture a little bit longer, maybe 40 feet long. He says, I have this 40-foot girder I'm laying down there, and it is 14 inches wide. And I'm going to set it up on the desk, so it's like 2 feet off the ground, and I'm going to stand on one side of this. I'm going to hold up a $20 bill. And anybody who's willing to walk the length of that girder to get the $20 bill, I'll give it to them. But the first one wins, and if you fall off the girder, you're out. You want to play that game? Everybody's like, yeah, $20, walk 40 feet. I'll do that. So, okay. So let's change it a little bit now. Everybody would do that because you love money. Sure, you'll do this. You walk across the girder for $20. I'm going to change it just a little bit. I'm going to move that girder and raise it a little higher. In fact, I'm going to put it between the two towers of the Pittsburgh Plate and Glass building. That's 685 feet high, and it spans over an alley. If you've been there, it's a street. So if you fall, I won't have to tell you you're out. You're out, right? So I'm going to sit about the same distance, though. It's the same girder. It's 14 inches wide. I'm going to sit on one end. I'm going to hold up $20. Anybody coming? Like, no. How about $2,000? How about $2 million? No one take him on it. When he got to $20 million, one smart aleck said, yeah, for $20 million, I'll go. Because, okay, I should tell you that wind's gusty here to 40 miles per hour, and it's wet. Anybody going to take it now? And even the guy who thought he'd do it for $20 million said, nope, don't think I'm going to do that. He said, so obviously what happens is you have valued your life more than money. So I guess money's not the most important thing to you, right? At least your life is more important to you. And everybody's agreeing with, this is an interesting little object lesson. And then he comes back and says, who here is a parent? And at the time, Emily was like 2.5 years old. And I'm sitting up front because I'm a nerd, and that's what I do. And so, I raised my hand. He says, how old, what do you have? I have a daughter named Emily. And how old is she? She's about 2. Okay. I'm going to change it for you. I'm going to be on one side, and you're going to be on the other side. But I'm going to hold Emily up there. Only if you don't come over, I'm dropping her. You coming over now? And the funny thing is, I had just gone through a situation where Emily had this blanket that she used to always love. You know, those parents here know what I'm talking about. There is something they just latch on to. It's theirs. And I had raised heaven and earth because we lost it at a restaurant trying to find this thing. I mean, I literally was going through dumpsters trying to find this thing. And I thought, you know, come over for Emily. I'll go over for a stupid blanket. You know, are you kidding me? He says, yeah. So basically, you're telling me now that money wouldn't get you over here, but your daughter will. How about that? And it's funny because I told this, those of you who know who Ed Hinchy comes here. Caitlin's about a year older than Emily. And so I was telling him this when I got back because it was really kind of a really cool thing that we did. And I asked him that question, would you come across for Caitlin? And his response was, I will, and he better not be there when I get there. But yeah, we'll go across for that, right? So he's saying basically your family's more important to you than money, clearly. You know, in this life or death situation, your family is more important to you than money. What else is more important? The problem is at that point, he kind of broke off from that, went on to something else. He says, as an exercise, you need to figure out what's important to you. Well, here's the problem with that. What's important to me changes. My priorities today are not the same as when I was 20. I promise you that. My priorities change. What I want to know is not what's important to me, but what should be important to me. What's important and what matters. And how do I figure that out? You know, a lot of times we think we're kind of on our own. We have to figure this stuff out on our own. But let me flip that question one more time. He didn't do this, but let me ask you this. Who do you know that would come over there for you? Now, who do you know that would come across that girder for you in that situation? Because I don't know how long your list is, but I'll tell you whose name should be first on the list is Jesus, because he'd do it. And you say, oh yeah, Jesus can walk on water. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Jesus, the man, the God, the man, who could slip and fall off of that, would still come across it for you. Jesus would do that. We know he would, because he died for us. You can always trust someone who's willing to die for you. Isn't that kind of the most basic thing of trust? If someone's willing to die for me, I think I can trust them. They've proved to me that what I am to them is more important than anything else. They're willing to die for me. They're not manipulating me. They're not lying to me. They're not cheating me. They're not going to change their mind. They're willing to die for me. I can trust that person. And this is where we kind of start with this, because God has to tell you what's important to you, not based on his agenda, but because he knows us simply better than we do. He knows how he created us. He knows what gifts he's given us. He knows what talents he's given us. He knows what he has planted in our hearts for us to do. And unless we connect with that, we will always go to bed thinking something's not right. I may have spent all day working, but I didn't get anything done, because we never ever touched what was important to us. God knows what's important to you. And that's why we need to ask him. Listen, this is nothing new. Jesus did this. Peter says, each of you need to use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful servants of God's grace in its various forms. God gives us these gifts, and we're supposed to be using those. Isaiah said it this way, I am the Lord, there is no other. I publicly proclaim bold promises, and I do not whisper obscurities in some dark corner. I would not have told my people to seek me if I could not be found. He's saying, look, I did this, and I want you to seek me, and I'm not being mysterious here. I'm not trying to be mystical. Sometimes we think God has this, mystical way about him, like he's some kind of a shaman, and we're like, oh, if I could just get past the Wizard of Oz's gate, I'll figure out what's really going on. He says, I told you to seek me so you'd find me. I have this for you, he says. You come to me and I'll tell you. I've got this. I gave you gifts. I'm going to tell you how to use them. I didn't give them so you could figure it out. And we make such a big stinking deal out of God's will, like it's some hard mystical thing. God says, I'll reveal it to you. Just come to me. I'm not going to put it on a billboard for you to see as you drive by. You need to come to me. But I'll tell you. I didn't do this so you wouldn't know. I didn't give you these gifts and then I'm going to send you to hell because you couldn't figure it out. What kind of a God would do that? But that's how we think. If I don't figure out God's will, I'm going to hell. No. He said, I gave it to you for a reason, and you will be happy in life if you find that reason, and I intend for you to ask, and I intend to tell you. That's what I want to do. Jesus does it. In the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, this is how we know he's the Son of God, because he rises before daylight and prays without falling asleep. See, I can't do that. I could do it. I could get up and I could go pray, but, someone will find me snoring on my knees. But a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. Every morning, Jesus got his marching orders from his Heavenly Father every morning. And it's like he walked around with a blueprint that he consulted from time to time. It wasn't on his personal phone that he had ahead of all of us because he was God, and he could see, what was there. No. Every morning he said, Dear Heavenly Father, what is my purpose today? See, not my will, your will. God, what does the heavenly, or what does the heavenly kingdom on earth need? Right? Remember the Lord's Prayer we talked about. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What can I do to make your will be done on earth as it is in heaven today? What do I need? And sometimes he gives us these things to do that just don't make any sense at all. And we see this in Jesus' life. Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard Jesus had made and baptized more disciples than John, basically he's becoming a superstar in the area, so they're worried about him, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee. But he needed to go through Samaria. Okay, so I did some Googling on this. Let me help you out. No, he didn't. This is Google. If you ever do Google and you click on the footpath, they always do the dotted line, right? So if I am in Judea and I'm going to Migdal, which is a city on the Sea of Galilee, this is my route. And it's going to take about 34 hours by foot. And now I could go out this way and go up a main road, and then it's 39 hours. But neither one of those goes through Samaria. In fact, if I go through Samaria, because the way Samaria was to come down the valley, I have to go down and come back out. So Samaria looks like this. I go into Samaria and back out of Samaria, and I just added 10 hours to my trip. I don't need to go through Samaria to get to Galilee. It doesn't even make sense for me to go through Samaria to get to Galilee. So why did Jesus go through Samaria? Well, this is the famous woman at the well. She's in Samaria. I believe Jesus went there to meet with the woman at the well. That was his whole purpose for going there. That was his reasoning behind it. That doesn't make any sense at all. If you're trying to if he told his disciples, hey, we're going to go to Galilee. Great, Lord, I'm going to go through Samaria. What? You can't go through Samaria. You can go down to Samaria and back out of Samaria. You can't go through Samaria. Yeah, but I have to go to Samaria. And this was really weird to them because Samaritans were considered kind of half-class citizens. They weren't quite Jewish. They weren't quite pagan. They were a little bit kind of in between. They were a blend of the two. That's why Jews always looked down on Samaritans. The Samaritans were a group of people that had intermingled with other nationalities. And so the Samaritans weren't pure Jews. They like to consider themselves pure Jews because they started Jewish, but since they intermingled with other cultures, they were no longer purely Jewish, and the Pharisees considered them sinners. You couldn't even touch them. That's why Jesus uses them all the time as illustrations. He said, no, I'm going to go to Samaria. What rabbi goes to Samaria? What rabbi goes 10 hours out of his way to go to Samaria? But Jesus meets the woman at the well, and it has such an impact on her that she starts telling everybody in Samaria about this amazing man who told her everything she had done. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, he told me all I ever did. So Christianity starts spreading in Samaria. That's why he went there. It wouldn't have been on our radar. And maybe before he woke up that day and went off to pray, it was on his radar. He knew he had to leave Judea. Maybe he didn't know he needed to go to Samaria, but his father says, I need you to go through Samaria. You're going to meet a woman there. It's going to change Samaria forever. I need you to do that. Yes, Father. And he goes. See, this is the pattern that we have to do. We have to know what's important to us, not just overall, but daily, because he's going to give us things to do. And they're going to be small. I keep talking about this, and we talked about this last week, don't despise small beginnings. Because God is going to give you something small to do first. And as you do that, he's going to give you something a little more, and then a little more, and a little more. I mean, the scriptures do tell us this. If you're faithful in little things, then you'll be faithful in larger ones. If you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest in greater responsibilities. This is Jesus talking. He said, I'm going to give you little things. Be faithful in that. I'm going to give you more. See, that's not what we want, though. We say, hey, God, give me the big picture. I'm a big picture guy. Give me the big picture so I can know that what I'm doing is worth my while. I'm spending an extra 10 hours going to Samaria, Lord. Can you tell me why? And I really believe the Heavenly Father said, I need you to talk to this woman, son. She needs to hear from you. And that's probably all Jesus needed. Okay. But God actually had a purpose beyond that. He was going to change Samaria. But he may have not revealed that. He oftentimes doesn't reveal it to us because we can't handle it. And the problem is that we have this vision of the way things work. It goes like this. God speaks. God explains. We obey. Right? God speaks. That's known as revelation. God explains. That's known as illumination. And we obey. It's known as obedience. So we have this picture, that's what life is. That's what it's supposed to be. This is how we teach, isn't it? If I'm teaching somebody to drive a car, okay, I need you to adjust your mirror. Why is that? Well, I'll tell them why. Right? This is how we teach. This is how we learn. When somebody tells us something, we ask why. And if you explain it and it makes sense to us, then we do it. See, this is the methodology of learning in our culture. But the methodology of learning in God's culture is this. God speaks, we obey, and he explains, maybe. And this actually goes all the way back to Noah's sons, by the way. Because each one of the nations that comes out from there. And if you look at the Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, okay? Matthew is a gospel of revelation. If you look at it, he's always talking about this is the revelation of who Jesus is, and here's how he fulfilled the prophecies, right? And then Mark is the shortest gospel in the Bible, and it's very much keen on action words. There's not much fluff in the Gospel of Mark. If someone's in a hurry, give them the Gospel of Mark. You're through that much quicker than the other ones. There's not much there. It's a lot of very simple action, a lot of verbs, a lot of things going on in it, because it's all about activity, and that had to do with who Mark was as a person. And then we have Luke. Luke was a doctor, and so he explains. So the entire Gospels are laid out this way. God's methodology is God speaks and then we obey. And then sometimes he explains and sometimes he doesn't, because sometimes we can't understand it anyway. He's like, I'd love to explain to you, but you can't get it yet. Maybe later I'll come back and teach you. This is God's way of doing it. And so when we pray and God gives us a little thing, we say, well, explain it to me, God, and I'll do it. He said, do it and I'll explain it. And this is kind of where we have a standoff with God. And sometimes when God actually explains it, it scares us. I've told you this story before, but when Victoria and I were married for like 2 weeks, we're driving down a highway in Texas, and she turns to me and she's talking to me about my family, and she found out my father was a pastor and asked if any of the boys had ever become pastors. I was like, no one did. And she says, you've never done that? I says, no, I thought about it when I was like 20 or something, but I never followed through on that. She said, good. If you ever become a pastor, I'm leaving. And I thought, okay. But it was like, to me, her saying, if you ever join the circus, I'm leaving you. It made about as much sense to me, because I was a professional geek and I had a pretty good life. I didn't work very hard, made some pretty good money. So I liked that. I wasn't going to become a pastor. And so then fast forward about 5 years ago, we're going across the Boston Bridge over here, and my lovely wife turns to me and says, if you ever become a pastor, I'm leaving you, right? This is like out of nowhere. We're talking about this at all. We're just driving across the bridge. I'm like, yeah, I heard you the first time. So, and she'd forgotten the first time. And so she goes, well, I was right then and I'm right now. Don't do it. I said, okay. No intention. I wasn't preaching anywhere. I wasn't doing any of that. And then, of course, a couple of years later, when she comes to me and said, I think we need to start a church, my response was, are you trying to divorce me? Is this just kind of a long play? I don't know. I know you Russians do that. But so is this just some kind of a long play? But I really honestly believe women have an antenna that's more tuned to the spirit world, the spiritual world. Spirits makes it sound worse, but spiritual world. Women do. They're just naturally more attuned to it. We talk about women's intuition. That's a real thing. And it's like not every, but I'm just saying in general, women do have an ability to sense in their spirit things that men don't, because just we're made differently like that. And I believe she literally looked over at me and God just kind of quickly revealed something. She says, oh no, I don't want any parts of that. And that's why it came out of nowhere to me, because I'm not there. But it's true. So if you look through the Bible, you see all kind of things, like when Pilate's wife comes to him and says, don't crucify this man. He's innocent. They're not even saved. They're not believers. They're not Jewish. They're Gentiles. And she comes to don't do this. See, God revealed something to her spirit that Pilate didn't see. But it happens all the time. It happens, and people know this. I mean, you've talked to people. They always will talk about a woman's intuition. It's a real thing. It also, by the way, makes women more vulnerable to spiritual attacks. So it's everything has a plus and a minus on it. But I believe that's what happened. But sometimes God reveals moments to us, just like the big planet scares us. That's why he doesn't always explain. He says, you're not ready for this yet. But I'm going to give you a little thing, and if you do it, I'll give you the next little thing, and you'll do that, and I'll give you the next little thing, and before you know it, you'll be there. And by the time you get to the point where you have to do something amazing that right now would scare you, it'll seem like no big deal to you. This is how he brings this up. You do things that, I can do that now. You don't even think about it, because he's brought us through that. So you have to know that when God starts speaking to you and starts giving you priorities to put on your list of things to do today, some of them aren't going to make sense to you. Do them anyway. If it's from God, you have to do it. Psalm says this, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Very misused scripture. A lot of people will tell you what this means. See, this means that once you're saved, God will give you whatever your little heart desires. It's not what the scripture says. He said he'll give you the desires of your heart. He's going to put the desires into your heart, is what it's saying. And those will be pure desires. So we can go ahead and follow them. This is also in Psalms 20. May the Lord answer you when you're in distress. May the name of God, Jacob, protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and grant you support from Zion. May he remember all of your sacrifices except your offerings. May he give you the desire of your heart and make all your plans succeed. Psalms 20. He's basically saying this is what God's going to do, right? He's going to give you the desire, and the plans that come out of that, he's going to bless, and you're going to succeed. Not, I really desire a new car, Lord. Can you help me make that plan succeed? That's not how it works. I'm going to give you the desires, and I'm going to give you the skills, I'm going to give you the plans, and I'm going to bless it, and you will succeed. When we seek God, he puts the desire into our heart. So Psalm also tells us, though, but unless God builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And unless Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. And this is what we do. We build our own house. We make our own plans. I decide what's important to me, and I start building that. And I'm going to do that. And then things start going wrong, so I have to stay up at night and worry about it. See? So I have to watch it. And God said, it doesn't matter. Watching it, building it, it's all in vain. Unless I'm in there, unless I'm the one who's building that, you're wasting your time. It is going to be destroyed. It's just a matter of when. What you need to do is you need to let me build the house and you let me guard it. And that's the great part. God guards it. So we don't have to worry about it. That's that sleep like a baby part we're getting to. So number one, focus on what is important. Number two, you have to trust God. See, don't blame God. Trust God. But you need to trust him. And when I said blame God, it's like, I didn't get anything done, but I got this done. That's what God wanted me to do, so that's okay. And you have to learn how to let that go. I know God wanted me to do this, and I did it. I don't understand why. And I didn't get to some of these returning some emails today or whatever I didn't get done because it was urgent and I didn't get it done. But I did what God gave me to do, so I'm going to trust him that was what we should do. You have to trust him. There's a level of trust. You have to trust that God knows what he's doing in this. So it was, a multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret and saw two boats standing by the lake. So this is one of my favorite stories. This is how he meets Peter. But here's the point of this story that, I've actually preached on this before, but we're preaching it a little bit different this time. I want you to capture Peter's side of this. Because this is a famous story, you know it. It comes up every Easter. Because he's going to call him to become the disciple. But the way he does it is he goes and meets them at his place of work. Because, see, we like to separate our work. Guys, I'm talking about these guys. I don't know if you women do this or not, but I know guys do. We separate our work from our religious life. We do that. We put a little line, a little separation of church and state kind of thing in our own little lives. And we say, look, this is my profession, Lord, and I'm doing my best I can. And I go to church. I go to that Spirit Chapel place, and I sing the songs, and I watch the videos, and I pray. But then I go back. Here's the deal. I won't bring my work into your church. Don't bring your church into my work. Right? We have this separation. There's my Christian world, and then there's the real world. And I actually have had people tell me that. Well, that's my real world. Really? What's church then? Your fake world? What is this we're doing over here? It's like rainbows and unicorns in this place. I don't know, but so that's kind of how we feel about this. I got my own work. I know how to succeed. I've been doing this for a while. I'm good at my job. So Lord, let me do this, and then hey, here's the payoff, God. I'll make more money. I'll give some of it back to you because I know you always need money. This is kind of how we do it. So I want you to take a look at Peter. Now, Peter's a fisherman. He's been fisherman for years. He's actually second-generation fisherman. He knows fish. He knows all about fish. Now, the night before he meets Jesus, he was out all night fishing. And something weird happened. He didn't catch one stinking fish. Not even a little tiny sardine. Nothing. And so the next day, they're sitting there repairing their nets because they pulled up a bunch of this is what happens when you're doing net fishing, a bunch of junk in it, and it rips the net. So they're fixing, and they've been up all night. They're exhausted. They're ready to go home. And Jesus starts walking by. He's got a crowd following him, and he realizes, I need to preach to them. So he goes and he climbs into one of the boats, which just happens to be Simon Peter's. I think he knew exactly whose boat that was. So he gets in there, he says, hey, take me out. I need to preach to them. And so Peter, okay, he's heard of this guy, never met him before. Okay, he's in my boat. So he paddles him out, so Jesus can preach. And then he sends everybody away. And there he is. He's sitting in the boat with Peter. Peter's exhausted. Peter just got his nets all repaired again. They're in the boat too. And then Jesus says this, launch out in the deep. Let's go back out in the middle of this and let down your nets for the catch. And really what Peter says next is this, Jesus, don't tell me how to fish. Now that's not the actual scripture here. I'll show you the actual scripture. But this is basically what Peter's is about to say. I don't know who you are, but I know all about fishing. And this is dumb. This isn't even the right time of the day to fish. I mean, it's hot now. The fish aren't anywhere near here. So what he says is this instead. Master, we worked all night and caught nothing. Right? Nevertheless, if you really want me to, I'll put down this net again. It's like, if it'll shut you up, right? If it'll keep you quiet, if it'll show you that you should stick to the preaching part and leave the fishing part to me, I will do what you've asked me to do. Because Peter's a professional. He knows how to fish. Jesus never fished before. So when they did it, they caught a great number of fish. The net was breaking again. So they're pulling up the fish. It's so full, it's breaking. And he calls to his partner to come out. They come out, and they have the same thing happen to them. And they're pulling so much fish into the boat starts sinking. This, by the way, is a fortune for them. They're professional fishermen. They've never had a catch like this in their entire lives. This is the pinnacle of his career. He will never catch more fish than this again in his life. This has never happened before. They're rich. In terms of what they are, they're rich right now. They have so much of this. And Peter realizes something happened here. And he says, depart from me. I'm a sinful man. I should have kept my mouth shut. I didn't know who you were, but I do now. Here's the point. Jesus knows more about fishing than Peter does. He messes with them later too, by the way. And they have a tax they have to pay. He says, yeah, go down there and catch a fish. Look in its mouth. And you got to catch, and there's this gold piece in it. Oh, Jesus did it again. And Jesus just loves messing with him around fishing. Just keep reminding him, I know more about fishing than you do, Peter. He knows about, this is amazing, but he knows more about Android programming than I do. That's what I'm working on right now. I have to remind myself sometimes, Jesus knows more about this than I do. He knows more about being a father than I do. He knows more about speaking Russian than Victoria does. I can go on and on and on and on. Jesus knows more about all these things than we do. He just does. And so we have to learn how to start trusting him, that when he's telling us to do something, it's not because he wants to ruin our business, but he wants to teach us who's really the Lord of our business. So we have to look at what's important to God if we're going to figure this whole thing out. So God gives us these things to do. They're little things. They don't even make sense. But when we do them, it starts changing everything. It is in vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, and to eat the bread of sorrows. This is the end of that psalm I was talking about where, unless the Lord builds the house. This is the end of that. Because he's saying, look, if you build your own house and you guard your own house, you're going to stay up all night worrying about it. And it's stupid. You're going to rise up early, you're going to sit late, and you're going to eat the bread of sorrows. You're going to be nervous, you're going to be crying, you're going to be fretting, you're going to live in fear. And look at this one. Because he gives his beloved sleep. See, that's the third thing, sleep like a baby. When God gives us what to do and we do it, even if it didn't make sense, just go to bed. Get some sleep. It's okay. You don't need to stay up and watch it. God's got that. God's watching it. God's built the house. God's watching the house. Your job now, sleep like a baby. So this is what I have for you. This is why when you go to bed at night, you shouldn't be frustrated or worried or anxious. I've got this. Go ahead. Sleep like a baby. Focus on what's important. Trust God. Sleep like a baby. Proverbs puts it this way: the blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and he adds no sorrow to it. So usually it's a good news, bad news. I can make my company profitable, but it's going to sacrifice me and my family. And guys make that trade, right? I can do this, but I know it's going to cost me this. I know it is, but I'm willing to make that trade. I'll make it up to them later. Later down the road, I'll buy them all kind of stuff. They'll be happy because I have a bigger house and a better car. So I'll sacrifice my family because I need to build my business right now. God's saying, when I give you something, there's no sorrow added to it. I don't make you make those choices. I'll never do that to you. When you're done, you will sleep like a baby. Everybody, please pray with me.